Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about propaganda that's doing the rounds. So you've got to give it to the globalists. So their propaganda is tightly coordinated, very targeted. There's obviously a central, secretariat that approves on what's the story of the day or the week and what's the propaganda. The other side's doing this. We got to hit back with such and such, and it's again, quite given they control pretty much all of the Western world's media. Then I guess it's not that hard for them. But that it's so tightly scripted and coordinated and on messages. I mean, quite a bit of discipline goes into that. Anyway, given there's been, a lot of talk about cutting back on mass migration, stopping it, preventing illegal aliens and illegal migration and deporting, particularly this has got the globalists really worried, is the mass deportation of illegals and so on. They're hitting back with their propaganda, and the claim is that all across the Western world, about 35%, or approximately 1 in 3, or all construction workers are illegals or mass peasant migrants, either one or mixture of both. So deporting these people, deporting the illegals, and this is the bigger issue probably for the United States, given there's a give or take 30 odd million illegals in the US, that this would adversely affect the construction industry. Now, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate on the Republican ticket in the United States, has been doing a lot of media interviews. And by the way, his performance at these media interviews is a masterclass on how to handle. And I'll do another video on this. So I'm just so impressed with it. But pretty much every interview he goes on, and given again that the globalists control pretty much the entire media landscape, every interview he goes on, they're trying to get him with gotcha questions and entrapment questions and kill shot questions and so on. And the condescension that they use is that any utterance he makes is false, but they're holding him to account because they're big tough journalists, but they're nothing. They're just two-bit activists masquerading as journalists. But he's very calm, very measured, gives his responses. Very, very impressive, J.D. Vance at the interviews. He keeps his demeanor and so on, and they're baiting him and doing everything they can to fluster him, but he keeps his cool. Again, very impressive. But even he's been hit up with these questions of the ticket. Donald Trump's talking about mass deportation of illegals, but given that a third of all the construction workers are illegals, how can you do this? The whole United States was just shut down if you got rid of these illegals. If they were deported, then nothing would happen, nothing would get built, nothing would get done, and the question is ridiculous and the premise is absurd. But what I've noticed is that all across the Western world now, whether it's be Canada or Britain or even Australia, there's this talk. Well, we got to keep the illegals here. We got to have more illegals, we've got to keep the super low bar illiterate peasant mass migration going because hey, otherwise nothing would ever get built. So clearly, it's a propaganda campaign they're engaging on to push back against something that they don't want, which is deportation of illegals, but also deportation of people who've been brought in to the West under super low bar, illiterate peasants, illiterate in their own language, and they're just used as building site labor. But I wanted to get more into this because it's something that I think is hugely relevant in economic terms. Now, there's because there's so much cheap labor around, and because it's supplied by scam Indian and Chinese and so on, labor, Filipino and labor hire firms, because it's scam labor hire firms that are operating, I would argue, illegally, but the Western governments just look the other way because the globalists have told them to. Because there's such masses of labor, they can bypass employment laws and employment condition laws. Now, if you're a sort of the way the construction industry is developed, and I've got some insight running on this, is, and I'm talking in the broader sense. This could be house building in the suburbs, or it could be I don't know, building extensions to a hospital. It could be anything. But the way it works, or the way it is now developed, based on these masses of cheap labour, is that the big construction firms have really turned into design engineer. Not even that. They're just managing. They're just big brands that manage the headline contract. That's really what it is. And they've very much been absorbed into the globalist system. They're responsible for all the brown and black people that are given these weird sounding jobs: deputy assistant, such and such, over director of the under director of the committee for the engineering of the, so there's legions of jobs being created for black and brown people. Again, these big multinational engineering firms have ceased to be construction firms in the proper sense of the word. They're just big brands that are, again, managing the head contract. Once they've got the head contract, which may or may not be won by tender. Remember, governments are richly rewarding them under globalist instructions, richly rewarding these firms, because the firms are in turn bringing out lots of peasant labour, or lots of black and brown people, and giving them jobs and so on. They're press releasing how many black lesbians they've hired, and all this sort of insane stuff. But they now have the head contract. They've won the contract. They then subcontract out pretty much everything thereafter. And so they want to retain as much profit as they can. And the profit retention, or the relative profit retention, has increased immeasurably, as have the salaries of the people sitting at the top. And the feather bedding in these places is absolutely astonishing. Every senior executive has got their very expensive mistress on the payroll, all this sort of stuff. Anyway, they subcontract all of that. Now, as they subcontract all the work out, the firms that are doing various bits and pieces of work become smaller and smaller, and the piece of the pie they're given is getting smaller and smaller to the firms at the bottom end of the subcontracting stack. And so, in order to make, and by the way, the businesses at that bottom end of the stack, they can't exist in a competitive economy. They're no longer able to exist as viable competitive businesses at the bottom end of that construction firm stack. So there's one. I'm thinking of one firm now where the entire work, other than the people in the office, the entire workforce are Filipino labourers in this particular firm. Filipino labourers through a labour hire firm. Now, there's various scams that go on in the Philippines. For example, people will go around and go around to illiterate peasants living in the jungle, if you like, in the Philippines. Go to these people and we'll give them loans and say, hey, I'll borrow you. And once the loans are taken, these people can't pay it back, and they can't comprehend mathematics or anything like that. And there's, well, look, we'll let you off the hook on the loan, but your two sons or your cousin and your brother, or have to come and work in my labour hire firm, and we'll send them to Australia, first world country, rich country. Hey, and then if they get to stay there, they bring out the whole village. You're, as a village head man, you're going to be big important. So they do all this sort of hocus pocus crap, and so it's a scam of the first order. So the two brothers or the cousins or whatever then come to Australia, work for labour hire. Now, there are a few things that cost money in the construction industry. Say the weather turns bad, it rains for a few days, for example, and you can't pour the concrete for the slab, or a lot of the work you can't do. So if that happens, the workers, it's not their fault that it rained. The workers can't do the work, but you still have to pay them under industrial law. You can't just look, a bit of rain, we're not paying you now. And so that's an expensive. You can stand them down, But if they're, and there's, if they're casual sort of day labourers type thing, you can stand them down, but you have to give them 7 days notice. You've got to pay them for 7 days if you want to stand them down. So typically it's not worth it. It's not going to rain for 7 days straight. So you don't stand them down. You keep them there on standby in case the rain stops and you want them back on site sort of quickly and this type of thing. So you've got to pay them. And other things too, like say you've got the concrete truck arriving and there's been some sort of mix-up or mistake, or it's the wrong concrete, or the truck arrives a day late, or whatever, but the workers can't do the job that they're supposed to do. The workers are all there on standby, or all on the work site ready to go, but the excavators that are supposed to be there won't actually arrive till the next day. There's been some paperwork error somewhere, but you still got to pay those guys for the day, even though they can't actually do any work until the excavator arrives. Now, what's different with these labour hire firms, these construction labour hire firms, is you can lay them off at 5 minutes notice, and you don't have to pay them, and you can mobilise them, and they don't get paid till they arrive on site to do the work and so on. So there's all sorts of ways you can avoid paying people for downtime or unproductive time. So if it rains, if it starts to rain, you can even if the rain's forecast, you can demand they come on site and start ready to work. And if it does rain, then you can just send them home. Or alternatively, they have to sit in the cars or the minibuses or whatever they have to sit, or there's a little tent sort of shelter that's made, and they have to sit there waiting for the rain to stop. But they don't get paid for that because they're not working. This is part of the labour hire scam. So they could sit there for a day or 2 days or 3 days. While it rains, they have to sit there not being paid, but they have to stay on site ready to work just in case the rain does stop. And the same if the concrete truck arrives late or arrives the wrong day or this or that, you can just stand these guys down. No, I'm not paying it. You're not doing any work. That's it. Oh, no, you can't go. You have to stay here. You have to stay here just in case the concrete truck does turn up, or just in case the rain stops. So you've got standby labourers, and they're not doing the complicated jobs, by the way, but they're doing the grunt work. But you've got standby labourers ready to start work at a minute's notice, but you don't have to pay them till they're actually working. Then it comes to the issue of payment. For example, if say the shovel or something gets damaged or this sort of thing, and you have to replace it. There's this old thing from like 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago, in the 1800s in mining companies, where they would deduct money for any broken equipment from your wages, deduct money from your wages. So there's all sorts of terrible scams going, but it doesn't end there. These labourers are then put up in apartments or houses, and they can be 6 people to a bedroom. Now, if you've got a two bedroom place, then there are 6 bunks in each of the 2 bedrooms, and another 6 bunks in the dining room or something, or the lounge room. It's a compact 2-bedroom apartment, and so you can have 18 people living in a compact 2-bedroom apartment. All from the third world somewhere, and they're all peasants. Now, it's not so bad for as you might think. I mean, that's sort of fairly confronting for someone who's been born and lived in the West all their life. But for these people where they live in the mud hut in the jungle, where there's no running water, there's no electricity, and there's no flushing toilets, or they think this is not so bad, and they live many people to a hut anyway. There are places, when I was traveling around the third world, I was astonished at how many people could live in a 1-bedroom apartment, for example. In India, there's this guy who wasn't poor, by the way. I mean, he wasn't rich, but he wasn't poor. And he's got multiple sort of generations of the family living in where was it? New Delhi, I think it was. Anyways, and they've got this compact 1-bedroom apartment. In fact, it's more like a bed sit really than a 1-bedroom apartment. 11 people living there. I mean, what do they do? And apparently they all just put mattresses or whatever on the floor, side by side. There are other places in countries like Indonesia, where the workers in the department stores, they actually sleep in the store at night. So they just lay mattresses down, or some covering blankets down in the counter, behind the counter at the retail store, and they sleep there. They again recruit these people from the rural areas, so they don't have to pay them. But this is so the scam goes on. Then they have to eat food that's brought to them from another Filipino business or third world peasant business that's owned by the same goon that owns the labour hire firm, and that gets deducted from their wages, and so on and so forth. So they're lucky to have more than a few bucks at the end of each week. But that's better than living in a mud hut in the middle of nowhere in the jungle. Now, we don't think that's a good idea. But how does this affect the economy, though, is where I'm going with this sort of story. Well, it has a huge effect. There's now a massive network across Australia, United States too, and elsewhere. There's a massive network of these sham labour hire firms that are putting these illegal workers, or for that matter, mass immigration, low-bar peasants that are being brought in, supposedly skilled workers that are illiterate in their own language and have never had a job in their lives, but they're doing grunt labouring work. So kind of who cares? But this means that the local citizenry in Australia and elsewhere around the West, United States and Britain, it doesn't matter, have to compete with those wages. And why would you hire a local white boy to do that, whether he's willing or not? Why would you hire a local white boy? Because he's at the end of the day, his unemployment benefit check is going to be 3 times more than you actually, in reality, you're prepared to pay the worker for doing it. When you consider, the packaging up with accommodation and food, the being laid off for weather and any other reason. I know from my own experience in infrastructure, sort of big engineering infrastructure projects, that there's quite a lot of downtime actually, through various reasons, whether it be the weather or something else. There's quite a lot of downtime, and you have to send people home. You can't demand that they stand by just in case. So to demobilise and remobilise is quite in itself quite expensive. And if they're casual labour, you don't know if you can get them back again, because they may have gone somewhere else in the meantime. So it's easier in the organisational scheme of things to keep these people sort of on ready to go. I mean, you may send them home because they can't work, but ready so you can get on the phone and call them up and get them back in again when you need to. But that's quite expensive by comparison. Now, so the economics of this are that you're deliberately not employing local workers simply because you have to. You can't exploit them and screw them and treat them as slave labour in the same way as you can these third world peasants. The illegality and the skirting of employment laws is outrageous, but nonetheless. And these businesses, that supply, that supply these peasant labourers through these scam labour hire firms, they're not viable businesses. They're bidding for contracts, subcontracts. They're at the bottom of the food chain, if you like, on the subcon. But they're bidding for contracts, and the profit that the owner of the business is making is purely 100% from the exploitation of the peasant slave labour. It's not from quality services or doing good business or having a professional team, or it's nothing like that at all. It's purely from the exploitation. Now, this seems to be built into the whole structure. Now it doesn't mean that it's now cheaper to do these projects because of all this exploited peasant labour. Far from it. The overall expense is increasing. It's just that the profit, the profit that's can be extracted, if you like, from the total project is being taken out of the hides and the asses of these exploited peasant workers. Now, on the other side, people say, well, they're not really exploited because they've just come from some fucking bullshit village in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of nowhere. So They're getting a flushing toilet and an electric light. What's your problem? I mean, they're doing okay. They don't care. Well, that's not true. But it's the knock-on effect that you've now got thousands of businesses at the bottom end of the food chain of the construction or infrastructure stack. None of these businesses are viable. They are only viable because of the exploitation of these third world peasants. And in so doing, they're putting Australians or Americans or Canadians, whatever, out of work. They're putting this work beyond their. Also, they're creating a casual workforce type mentality to the organisational structure of these businesses. So the idea that you casually get people on and dismiss them the next day, that this attitude is permeated now throughout not only construction but anything from take out food and pizza delivery and retail shops and the whole thing. This idea you can just casually grab people, and when there's a lot of cheap labour around, especially when they've come from a third world country, then they're more likely to accept or tolerate the imposition of these conditions. But again, it means that there's a huge number of businesses, massive numbers, whether it be nail painting salons or whether it's takeout food, cafes, this sort of thing, that only exist because of this exploitable third world labour. So they're not viable businesses, and they keep the local citizens out of work, and they allow laws, industrial relations and employment laws to be subverted and circumvented at all levels. And that's not a good thing. Why would anyone think it is? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.